Hello, and welcome to another episode of Strange Dominions. I am your host, Octavian Graves. Tonight, Ian and I speak with Wilde Medium. We discuss all things ranging from Hecate, tarot, pendulum divination, psychic abilities, Helios, and much more. As always, if you have seen something strange or unusual, such as a cryptid, spirit, UFO, or anything in between, please send us an email, strangedominionspodcast@gmail.com, for your chance to be on the show. Now, our interview with Wilde Medium. All right, tonight we are speaking with Wilde Medium, also known as Mandy Medium. How are you doing, Mandy?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing really good, and Ian is here as well.
Yep. I know I'm coming back after a little hiatus, and it's good to be back on this show. Ms. Wilde, thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we'll just kind of let you start wherever you want on where this kind of journey started for you.
Sure, absolutely. I'll tell a little bit about myself right now and then kind of start from a sort of beginning and let it roll.
All right, great.
My name is Mandy Wilde. I'm also known as the Wilde Medium to some. I live in Los Angeles, California, where I am a medium, astrologer, and a sorcerer. I also educate on the radical rituals of the divine feminine. And at the moment, I host two different biweekly gatherings on both Instagram and Facebook, which thank you for coming to those.
Oh, of course. It's my pleasure.
I am an Akate devotee. So one of them is Inomine Akate, and it is a dark moon gathering that I hold each month under the dark moon. And we do a communal dipnon where I also petition Akate for her graces in the upcoming lunar month. And then the second one is Reset and Release, which is a full moon ceremony and meditation. So those are something that I keep rolling every month, along with some live events that I do throughout the month as well. And then my bread and butter is, of course, with my practice, Wilde Medium, where I'm a medium, an astrologer, and I do all sorts of things over there. But how that came to be was, and we spoke about this a little bit, I've always been able to see spirits, and that was not such a fun thing at times growing up. And it's been an amazing thing that has also been a bit of a nurturing quality as well as I've gotten into my older age. Older, oh my gosh. But I was raised extremely religious. I was born into a very, very religious household. I don't know if you're familiar with United Pentecostals at all.
Somewhat, a little bit, not much.
Okay. This is a religion that, I mean, we didn't cut our hair, we didn't wear pants if we were female, you don't have TVs, you don't have Christmas trees. Like it's it, it didn't suit me very well. And this was the case even as a young child. But I remember seeing my very first spirit. It was in elementary school that I remember about, I think I was about 6 or 7. And my parents had gone away from the church a bit and had bought a Christmas tree. And I had never had one in my house before. And it was so fascinating. And I had snuck out in the middle of the night to go look at the lights because they were so pretty. And there was a man standing in front of the tree. And I remember waving at him, thinking, oh my gosh, this must be Santa Claus. This is, you put a tree up and this Santa man comes. And the man just kind of slowly looked at me and then looked back at the tree. And I remember very distinctly, because this is how spirits come to me now, even still, is with a very kind of hollowed out face. And I remember I ran to my parents' bedroom and said, Mom, Dad, wake up. Santa's in the living room. He came with a tree. And they were like, my dad's with the baseball bat. What do you mean someone's in the living room? And he goes, and no one's there. And I'm staring right at this man. So that was the first time I realized, oh, okay, maybe, I don't know, I'm seeing things that aren't there. But this progressed as I got older. And you can probably imagine seeing things like this would start to give someone anxiety, especially in their early teen years. So I started to look for ways to explain this because it was not something that my parents liked me talking about. And I started to lean into finding books on like tarot, and I got my first tarot deck and reading anything and everything that I could about witchcraft. I thought this could, would get me a little bit closer to what was happening. So, really, that was kind of what opened the door to my magical practice and divination, which we also spoke about a little bit as well.
Well, that's awesome. And I think that your story will probably resonate with a lot of people who started out in an extremely religious household and then gradually gravitated more towards their own form of spirituality. Now, the next question I have is, where does Hecate come into the picture?
Hecate, the primary goddess. She came into my life many years before I accepted the tapping, right? I don't think I realized what was happening and who it was at the time. And there were times when I was getting signs and thinking, okay, feels this feels like it's something trying to like court me, so to speak, and different lessons coming up in my life. And I was not necessarily listening to it all too loud, but I think the first time I realized, wait, this is a kate, is I was sitting with my candles at my altar, probably I was, this is back in grad school. By the way, I'm 50, so that was a long time ago. And I was sitting at my altar, I had my candles lit, and I was just at a really kind of low point in my life. What I had felt was a really low point in my life. And I kind of just like undressed and just like kneeled on my knees until they were just raw and hurting. And I just kept like praying and praying for whatever this was that was tapping me to just come forward. And I heard Hecate, I heard Hecate, and I heard Hecate, and I heard Hecate, and I kept hearing it. And she told me to get up, and she told me to take down my hair, and she told me to look at myself in the mirror. And I did. And then I just started bawling. And from then on, I promised I wouldn't ignore the messages coming through, the symbols coming through, the signs coming through. And I didn't know where to also look for more information because back then yes, the internet existed, but it was not what it is today. So there were readings I could find, like the Chaldean oracles, etc. And so I was trying to find anything like that. But it was when I found that she was in the PGM that I grabbed this book, and I had it for years before I even knew what in the world to do with it. Because I don't know if this was the same for you, but when you open up the PGM, the Greek Magical Papyri, and you're not used to this book, it is like wild. You're like, what in the world does this want me to do?
It's like a Rorschach test in a book. That's the only way I can explain it. When I first opened it up, I just didn't know how to read it. Like, it was very confusing. Luckily, I had also gotten Stephen Skinner's sort of key to the PGM, which really helped. And obviously Jack Rail's PGM course absolutely helped solidify the right order and how to read these things. But I absolutely agree. It is a doozy if you're not used to what you're seeing.
It is. And like, what does, do the usual mean? What do all these things mean? But it was wildly exciting because as I identify as polytheist and pagan, and I'm seeing Zeus, I'm seeing Hades, I'm seeing Sekhmet, I'm seeing all of these like wonderful names, and I'm going, oh my gosh, I need to do this and I don't know how. And so I let that sit for years until I found Jack Grail and signed up for the PGM course, which is I've done the first one 2 times through and am now on the second, which is fantastic, by the way, for anyone out there listening. Highly,
Yes.
highly recommend his
Yes.
courses.
I've taken the
But
first one, and I'm now also enrolled in the first cohort of the second one along with you, and I'm really, really enjoying both of them a lot.
the magic I find with the PGM just works. People always ask, "Oh, what kind of practitioner are you?" I have considered myself more of a practitioner of chaos magic in the past, and I really think this is an easy progression into the PGM after practicing chaos magic. Right? It just flows so seamlessly. But speaking of Jack Grell too, is he offers a fantastic Akate course, which I took and absolutely loved. That was so eye opening because I went 10 plus more years with Akate and not having the material and that expertise, that different perspective come through. I was working, and this is great too, though. I was able to work with her on my own and get my own sense of relations with her, have my own relationship with her develop, before the course. But now I feel like it's gotten even stronger. But she actually is key to keeping me grounded on my mediumship practice. I ask her to oversee any sort of reading that I do. I ask her to oversee any sort of ritual or magical practice that I take. So she acts as a bit of a bouncer. For me, I ask her to come in before any reading and to oversee my guides and to oversee my clients' guides and to be able to escort the spirits back to where they need to go safely after we excuse the reading.
That is really awesome, and I feel the same way. She kind of is a bouncer in my life as well, as far as which spirits, are welcome and which ones kind of need to be checked at the door.
Exactly. She's What I love about Akate is she has so many different faces to her, right? And she's shown herself in many different lights. Never her actual face, though, right? The one time, there was one time after a dipnon that I did on Facebook and Instagram, and I usually have a hard time sleeping on any sort of new moon or full moon. Just the energy kind of keeps me awake. So I moved into the living room and I was doing something, reading something, I had the lights on, and I started to doze off. And the altar was still very active after the dipnon. I had the collective dipnon that we did all on the altar. And I remember in my sleeping state, I like rose up and I looked over at the altar and saw a very, very tall, shrouded back of a figure. Looked like a black veil, kind of like hanging off of her, but a little fuzzy. And I went, "Oh my goodness, she's come to collect the names and the dipnon. She's come!" And I was so excited. And all I heard in my mind's eye was, "Turn away and go back into your room." And so I did. And left the lights on and everything.
I kind of, both Ian and I had a somewhat of a similar experience. We were doing a dip knot at a three-way crossroads, which I have frequented many times and had a lot of strange experiences. And Ian's a little bit higher on, I guess, the psychic level than I am as far as like senses go. But we both got the sense that once it was over, there were things coming and it was time for us to vacate. So I think that's a very, very intrinsic feeling when working with her specifically.
Absolutely. The leaving the dipnon at a crossroads, leaving an offering at the crossroads, and turning away and not looking back. If they say if we look upon the gods, we go mad, right? Oh, sorry, I don't know if it like cut off there for a second. Mm, Okay, but yeah, with Akate, she's She's someone who has helped also, and I think this is why she had originally come into my life. Was I was going through a a piece of my life where I was healing from something extremely traumatic as a child that happened to me as a child, all throughout my childhood, rather. And it was time that I faced it, and it was time that I worked through it. It was time that I was to get therapy for it. It was a time that just it needed to be confronted. And it has been really interesting sitting with her different currents, and especially back then, not knowing the names of the currents or the epithets that I was sitting with. And so now when I visit these particular epithets, they are quite rewarding. And I recognize, I'm like, Azostos, that was who I was sitting with back then, or Brimo, that was who came to me at this section of my life, or. So it's been really, really nice. I find that she's a quite a versatile goddess as well. I think she has the ability to connect, or people have the ability to connect with her in so many different ways. She shows up so differently for all of us. So yeah.
That is a really cool idea about like identifying which epithet you're, conversing with and being able to single them out as sort of their own thing, but also as being the grander picture of Hecate. I take I've taken Jack Grail's Hecate course and loved it, but my daily practice is mostly with Jason Miller's Hecate course, and there are 3 specific epithets that are used quite often. And so I've gotten to know the feeling of those epithets and their character and what their sense is when they're in a room with me. That is a very rewarding experience.
It is, and isn't it lovely when you can name the epithet that comes? Because sometimes you don't know what current it is that you even need at the moment, and she does, and she sends it to you at the time you need. And I have come to recognize them like different friends, right? Coming in. The the Ezostos epithet, which I spoke about earlier, it is a very empowering epithet for me. It feels it feels like I can call upon that aspect of her when I feel like I don't have a voice in something, when I feel like maybe my my power has been taken away, or maybe I'm not able to express my power the way I need to, right? Or if I'm dealing with something traumatic, it's just a nice way to just kind of like break free. And the more somatic you can become with these different epithets, the more intense they even become. So
Very much agree, and I love that perspective on just the epithets in general, because I think we hear a lot of people talking about them just as a way of bringing her in and having her in presence. But I think that there's the idea of them being individual powers is a very nuanced idea, and I just think that that's a really awesome take.
oh, thank you. Yeah, it wasn't until this the last couple of years when I took the Akate class, and I remember, I forget which lesson it was, and it was Azostos, and I broke into tears. Like, I was like, that is the name of the current that comes. That is the name of the current that comes when I need. That's the one that comes for me the most, to be honest. Um, I am a survivor of incest. I was sexually abused through my childhood, and it took a long time to, not that anyone can actually heal all the way from that, but it was definitely Azostos. It has been her this entire lifetime of mine that has been able to help burn and shatter those chains, right? That have bound you. I don't know if you're familiar with this sort of like trauma, but sometimes it becomes really difficult to be able to speak for yourself, to be able to stand up for yourself, to be able to just form words, right? And yeah, that's been the one.
Well, I'm not. an experiencer of that specific form of trauma. I do have trauma of my own, and it's taken me a long time to really process it by itself. I haven't even really begun to bring it into my magical practice as of yet. But it's interesting that you would bring that up, because just today I have been trying to, doing a lot of introspection, both because the moon was in Scorpio. My sun sign is Scorpio, but my moon is in Sagittarius, and that is actually what the moon is in, I think, right now. And it's
It
been
is.
bringing out a lot of retrospection and introspection into who I am and how I act in the world. And there's a lot of things that I don't like about myself that I didn't really realize I was doing until now. And so one of my ideas was to bring that to Hecate and see what can be done about it, about transforming that into something that is positive and useful.
Oh, that's a fantastic idea. That I I I love offering any sort of like trauma or something that like is feels really icky at the time. I love to bring it forward to primo, right? And like have a little fire going in my cauldron and just talk to it and ask for like primo, and I start clapping, trying to emulate the crackling embers of the fire, right? That like really angry, terrifying, like give it to her. She's mad you've had to like deal with it this long. Give it to her. Let her like burn it away. Let her just like purify you through that fire. Her fiery epithets are fantastic for that.
That is such a great use of that specific power. I mean, I think a lot of people kind of look at Brimo as sort of for baneful or vengeful acts against others, or, justice and things like that. But I think
Mhm.
turning it inward and, offering up those parts of yourself that you don't like to this very fiery, vengeful aspect of Akate is a really, really unique take.
Yeah, it that I mean, she's got so many. She's got hundreds and hundreds of epithets we could use, right? And for like what you're talking about, the work that you were considering doing, even like Dracana, the serpentess, like that, it's got that idea of the Ouroboros, right? Like that shedding of the skin, that Scorpio shedding, and then like going into that fire element of Sagittarius, and then calling in like Dracana and Brimo. I think that would be strikingly powerful.
Absolutely agree. Moving on from Hecate, I think I'd love to talk about your psychic practice and how that works, especially in relationship with divination.
Absolutely, yeah. So the my mediumship, like I said, I've been able to see spirits for as long as I can remember, and they're everywhere, right? I walk in someplace and you can see it. Sometimes it's a bit sad because real fast before getting into like past souls, like when we talk about ghosts or like are ghosts real, like what is a ghost? It's like a fragmented soul. It's someone that is past, but there's still like fragments of that energy that is left, right? Not all of their energy, but a little bit of that energy is still left, kind of behind finishing working up on something. It's kind of like I've been shown it's like taffy. And so there's those spirits, and then there are those that I connect to for my clients, which are like past loved ones or any sort of like ancestors or other divine entities. I love connecting people with divine entities that are surrounding, because we all have different currents, different divine currents that are around us. And it's kind of like what we were just talking about with Akate's epithets. It might not be like, oh, ian has ian has let's let me think of one like about that would like pop up. Like Ian has Hermes around him, but it would be more like, you know what, there's a current of expediency around you right now, that sort of thing. And you can work on those. We can pull through that and work with those with a reading. But for divination, what I love to do is, yes, I read tarot, and I read tarot like a traditional tarotist would, or tarot reader would. But when I'm doing my mediumship, sometimes I use tarot in a totally different way. I was shown a long time ago by one of my guides to pull out my deck, because sometimes it can get quite. And Ian, you said you do like psychic work as well.
I do. And to compliment you, you're not wrong with the Hermes being around me comment for a few reasons. But yeah, I've done tarot for about 20 years myself, and I branch out into other psychic things. I know a lot of my work in the last few years. Like I never stopped doing tarot, but I've moved into, I say pendulum work, but that has a little loaded connotation. I'd say
Hmm.
more like a spirit based scrying that I use pendulum
Yes.
with. Because of the nature of a certain spirit and a certain stone, it just works really well. But go on, please.
Yeah. So I was going to say, like with psychic, like psychic mediumship, sometimes we get bombarded with spirits, right? And so I talked about earlier how I use Akate as a bit of a bouncer with those spirits. She kind of holds that velvet rope, right, and allows them in one at a time. But sometimes there are multiple messages coming from multiple spirits, and it just can't be stopped. And so what I've learned to do through my spirit guides is to pull out my deck, and I use a different deck than what I read my own tarot or someone's tarot with. I have a deck that I'll pull out, and I start to pull the cards, and I'm shown activations of the spirit that's coming forth. And that's how they communicate to me how they passed or what they ailed with. And that's, we do that at the beginning of the reading so that I have like that validation. Okay, well, this is the spirit. Perfect. We've got him. Now let's move on, because that's not what is going on. On that other realm, they're not still suffering from the cancer, they're not still suffering from the bad hip, they're not still suffering at all. But that's a way that I'm able to like help validate what it is, who it is that I'm connecting with. So I use tarot as a mean of getting that information. And so I'm not reading it like I would if I was pulling out my cards, being like, all right, the tower, blah, blah, blah. I'm shown something different each time. So let's say I pull the emperor card. Sometimes I might see that full red robe and think, okay, there was some sort of like activation in the blood. This person passed away from a blood illness. Or sometimes I'll pull the emperor card and it'll be a completely different message from my guides. So I use tarot in very different ways. I have the traditional way, which I'll read for myself and others. And then I have the way that I've been shown to use with my mediumship, which is really nice because it also kind of keeps things in line and allows me to recognize what kind of spirit is coming forth too. Is it an ancestor? Is it an angel? Is it a past loved one that is close to them? So I've been using that for, boy, gosh, a really long time now, and it's worked so nicely. And then to speak on the pendulum, I am such a fan, and I don't know why it took me so long to to make my own pendulum, but I have a little rusty key and then like a skeleton shell, and I put a piece of twine on. And so whenever I have to answer any sort of like yes or no question that I'm having trouble hearing, I'll use my pendulum, and it works beautifully. And anyone out there listening, the pendulum is the most easy thing to just make and just have and practice. And it's wild how accurate it is for yes or no.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
I love it. I love it. And
I
then
wanted to just comment on your how you used the cards to interface with your mediumship readings in that specific way, your original draw at the beginning of the reading. I think that's really brilliant. I too also have, two or three different, modes with tarot, as you said. One's more like, I'm giving a reading for someone, and then I'm doing something more spiritual, and then sometimes it's for kind of more deep esoteric patterning. A lot of times
yeah,
back in the day, it was a lot of the Toth deck for that, because that deck absolutely, and you know what I mean. I think all decks have a personality that come
yeah.
from the current. You use the word current. I like that. Hermes. That's how I would phrase it as well. And but I think decks have their own currents too, and
Oh,
for
yeah.
and they have their own personalities. But go on, and love to hear more.
They really do, right? And just I was going to talk a little bit about scrying too, because I do it just a little bit differently. I think that I was going to suggest to some. if they have trouble scrying. But to speak on the different personalities of the tarot decks, so the different voices, I don't know if either of you have had this experience, but sometimes a deck will speak to you for years and then it becomes mute, and you're just like, why can't I like get anything from this deck? And it's like your favorite deck, and you're like, but I identify with so many images, like what's going on? And it just goes quiet, it goes silent, right? For
Yeah. And that's, it's funny you put that way. I never really looked at it in that way, but that has happened. And I think in the past, it's like, perhaps it's my state of mind. And then I would
yeah,
use a totally different deck, randomly. And it's something I would never use. And it would just speak in this totally different voice from a totally different level. And it would be so absolutely clear. And I look at it like, oh, I see it now. Okay. Because I've used the Toth deck, the Rider Waite, the Scapini, I think was the first deck I've used ever when I was like 16. And a friend, that was his, and he showed me how. And then I have this, you ever heard of the Mystical Fairy Tarot?
no, but
It's,
I love the
it is,
sounds of it.
it's a really, it's a fairy tarot. It's kind of like a really storybook kind of fairy tale tarot deck with a lot of beautiful art in it. And, that was a very big far cry from, say, like Crowley's Toth deck. But the way it spoke to me when I read it years ago, it became one of my, I don't use it too often, but it read and communicated like a storybook, like Fey logic. And that was very different. And that made me realize that, tarot is archetypical and those are forces, but the way they can come and communicate with you is almost like a spirit in itself. Because you're talking about not all spirits are from the same origin. And not all currents are the same origin, and they're very deep. So just you describing that, I haven't heard anybody else put it that way. So I value your input.
Oh, oh, okay. Well, it, you know, it, I learned on the first deck I ever was given. I was in high school, and it was a Marseille deck, and I really learned on that type of deck, and I hadn't seen at that point. Well, no, I had had a deck before, but I was trying to read when I'm trying to think back when I had received this one. Anyway, it was one that I was like, okay, this is speaking to me. And for some reason, those very kind of crude images with that, they look, I mean, it literally looks crude, like it's been wood carved, right? Like the 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 king, the queen, they look mean. They look
They do.
like
I'm thinking of the deck.
like, but I learned on it, and I loved it, and I used it, still do use it for, I mean, it's so thin and like faded now, but I still have it, and still it's my
It's like a
preferred
heart deck for
deck
you.
when I read for myself.
Oh yeah, that's
Do
how I
what?
feel about it's like a heart deck for you, regardless of how it's like that old, it's like the old house that you hung out with your grandparents in as a kid, or the same energy, I guess. Because the Scapini deck is like the Scapini deck, I feel the same way about. Like it's kind of harsh and it's kind of medievalish, and it,
Yeah.
but it's that whenever I look at it, I'm like, oh, you taught me.
Yeah,
Like,
you taught me. You're here.
Mhm.
We're here
And
together now.
like it'll always be that warmth. So in my last comment, so was talking about it. I really, you talking about using the pendulum with tarot is also something I do a lot of with my modern readings. Especially, I've started to do it for like clients and people who seek readings. Is working on ways to use them in tandem, and that can have some amazing results. Like you said, it's, I think you're the only other person who I've met or heard from that has mixed the two. But sometimes I've got like, I'll do a whole setup where I'll get some things to write down, and I'll start doing a tarot reading, and then I'll have my pendulum, and I'll kind of do a small invocation, and I'll use them both as needed. And when you get in that vibe, they speak to each other really well. Also
I
kind of like a
love
left right brain thing, perhaps, like where
Yeah.
pendulum can be very analytical, but it gets you that specific conversation tone. And like yes, no, obviously is a basic. You can do a little more with it, and in tarot, it tells a story. One is giving you direct, almost like, analytical knowledge, and the other one is telling you, it's getting you involved. It's getting you the whole landscape. So, but that's my take. I just appreciate you kind of doing both.
Oh, I reach for everything. I'm telling you, I will try anything and everything, and that's part of that chaotic part of myself. But yeah, that Marseille deck that I learned on, I had it for so long, and I moved after grad school. I moved to Chicago, and I lived there for about 20 years, and that entire time, it stopped talking to me. I never got rid of it. But it stopped talking, and I was like, okay, it stopped. Shouldn't say it stopped talking to me, but we know what I'm saying. It started. It was silent.
Like
It
you were
just
out
kind
of
of shut
sync or
down.
something.
We were out of sync, and it could, I am an astrologer. It could also be like location, which I think had a lot to do with it. Also, like you had said as well, like frame of mind. And then
That
that was
does
when I
provoke an
started.
interesting question. Sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah,
cut you
bring
off.
it.
Just I never thought about that. And
Like
the idea of when you
locational.
do location as specifically like an astrological way as well, how could that influence your connection when you're giving readings? That's something I'd not, local location. If I went to a specific location with a certain kind of energy in it, sure, but like geographical location, I've never given that thought, and it just kind of what you said popped into my mind, and now I have to wonder. You have any thoughts on that?
I've thought about it. I mean, I think something also like the Merslide deck is, you do have to use your imagination a little bit longer, your third eye, right? A little bit more intensely sometimes with that deck, because there isn't necessarily the the story, the grandiose story. Like it's not illustrated the same as like a Rider Waite deck. And I think that where I had that given to me, I know that I was on lines that were, well, here, let me start by saying this. When I moved to Chicago, that was my Saturn line. And I I think I needed to literally have things like spelled out for me when I moved there. And I was needing something with a little bit more of a storyline, because I was used to maybe reading this deck in a different, actually, let me see where my line is really fast while we're doing this. But now that I'm in LA, I've been here for 6 years, and I'm not kidding you. I remember when I moved into my first apartment and I was unpacking, and one of the first things I unpacked from like one of my boxes, I was like, this deck, oh man, I'm always so happy to see it. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna give myself a reading. And it's been quiet for a minute, but let's just see. And it was like instantaneous, back to being its warm self. And I thought, holy mackerel, I'm now living on my Neptune line. So it's more of an abstract, right, thinking line. So I'm able to maybe read into it more. I don't know. Maybe that has something to do with it. I could be placing, I could be giving it more direction than it is. I have no idea.
I
But
mean,
yeah,
maybe,
that
but
does
maybe
bring up a
not. Like that's something to think about. And I mean, the planets do, they influence many of the things we do, lots of things that we don't realize we're doing, like, movement and states of mind on all levels. But again, that's something I hadn't thought about. But even just giving that perspective that you just gave, it could be, it might be reading into it a little too bit, or a little too much. But if I've learned anything, sometimes that's, there's sometimes not too much. Sometimes it's, you get an idea right when you need it, and it kind of puts pieces together. And you're like, oh, that does make sense. I wonder.
Yeah. I mean, it, living on that Saturn line for so long, I might needed to utilize a more poetic or storytelling aspect of my mind to balance out, right? And
I've been
so
there.
maybe.
It's true. Like I've been there. Like even when I was kind of deep practicing into pendulum style scrying, after a while, it made me realize like my normal psychic, like my psychic ability, which usually I'd say like my ability to kind of visualize and communicate with spirits more intuitively dampened, or to me, it felt like it kind of dwindled a bit because I was kind of knowingly relying on this physical external focus to communicate, and I ended up putting it away and going back to basics. And then after time, it all kind of came together, and I was good at all of them, but I guess my point in saying that, like, I suppose there are two sides of the way we think, and there's that storybook way, there's that, color-based, very intuitive way, and then there's that, I need to just know the meanings of these symbols as they stack up in this situation in an almost numerical way.
Right.
It's tough to get them intertwined. And sometimes when you need one, you get the other. And that's probably a state of mind thing.
True. And for anyone out there that's listening who is just getting started in reading tarot, the best advice I can give you is to throw away the book and to stop looking things up on the internet. Throw it away and go off of how it feels, because each deck is going to speak to you so drastically different, and you're going to get something completely they all have different tones, they all have different wisdom that we gain from it, right? And you'll get your favorite, and that will change. It will constantly evolve, and then you'll have that one that you go back to, like we were just talking about. But it looks, and especially for the Marseille deck, I know that reading those can get a little trying, and it feels like, okay, it's just two clubs crossed. I don't, and some leaves around the border, but something that's really, but like, look at it requires you to dive a little bit deeper, and that will help so much. And if you don't know what deck and you're starting out, you don't know what deck to get, hey, get a Marseille, because when you learn to read that, all of the others just really fall into place.
You're right. And I attest for the readers, that was me when I was younger. Like, I remember the Versailles deck, and I looked at it and I tried, and some of the older ones, and I'm like, I can't, like, I need something more. Like, I couldn't make that connection. And of course, later I eat my foot and got into the whole, spent years on the kind of the Kabbalistic and that side of, the tarot deep dive. So I guess younger me really didn't have any excuse. But for what you're saying, for new readers, yes, that hard work pays off. And
it does.
This is, you don't mind me, I would like to share a recent story for me and Octavian, who's been picking up tarot. And I've been, I won't say tutoring him, but, being there as somebody's kind of done it a while, helping him out with what I know. And he did actually, he gave me a reading for, like, a real reading for the first time the other day, a couple weeks ago. And I'll just put him out there. Like, he's very by the book, and I am very kind of, I'll go with the flow. I have a big library, but, I won't let it stop me. So in your advice about just letting, see how it feels and getting your own definitions in there, that was the advice that I give people when, they come for advice or something. It's put the definitions away. Don't throw it away. Put the definitions away and see what all of those cards are talking to you. Like, how are the pictures? If not the pictures, just every little detail on that card. How many clubs? What direction are they pointing in? What are they referencing the card next to it? What direction? Every little thing. And he was, a little nervous because, a lot of people, they use the booklet, or they use a book to kind of get the definitions of the cards, and it still gives great readings. And I kind of pushed him to say, hey, put it down. Just read as it goes. You know me well. Just read as you feel. Look at each card and see what's coming to your mind. What feeling is rising in you, especially when you apply it to me. And he did, and he read it, and he wanted to pick up the book, and it made him put it down. And he's like, I think I messed up. And I told him, I was like, that's actually one of the best readings I've had in years. And that was right. And it was, and I didn't lie to him. And it was that whole thing. Like, you start out, get your own definitions, then add the book in. I think at the end of the day, it trains you a lot faster and better than otherwise. Like, you'll get to the same end, but I don't know if that makes sense. I might be wrong.
I get a very bad case of, I'll just put them, why not me's, where when you're reading online about other people's experiences with spirits or with psychic ability, and, you're kind of doing the same things that they are, but your experience, is very different from what they are experiencing. Because personally, I don't get the feelies when I do stuff. I don't see things. I don't hear. Well, I shouldn't say I don't hear things, because there have been a few instances, but I've often felt like people who maybe don't even put as much into their practice as I do, and I spend a lot of time with this stuff, more than I probably should, seem to get much more visceral experiences than I do, or I should say have. It's changed a bit. But I suffer from that a lot to this day. And Ian has been a very big help in allowing me to sort of trust in my own experiences and abilities. And I have felt like my psychic shell is breaking open piece by piece.
That, I love hearing that. And Octavia, I hear that from clients a lot, where they say, I'm doing these things and the I'm not having the visions, or I'm not having like something material. They're not getting the feels. And y- I there sometimes, the way spirits will come to us is not necessarily how we, and you probably already know this actually, but like, for anyone else who might be listening, like, it doesn't always come to us exactly how we think or may expect it to, right? It can happen in so many subtle ways. I'm going to use my husband for an example. He does more work with the Grimoire Verum, and I, I I come in to scry for him sometimes with his work. I'm not familiar as much with that as he is, but he'll do something, and sometimes he'll come up. I remember one time in particular, he's like, I worked, and like with the Grimoire Verum too, like sometimes it takes months to make a tool, or to get things, to get things all in place. And he went through the operation, and he came up, and after this was, I mean, months and months of preparing for this, and he comes up, and I was like, how was it? How, like, tell me about it. And he goes, nothing. It was just silent. And I looked at him and I went, that is what came to you, was that silence. We live in Hollywood on a very busy street. It is never, and I mean never, silent where we live. I mean, you can have windows shut, fans on, you hear sirens, you hear mufflers, you hear people. I mean, it is never silent. And I was like, it was the silence. And he was just like, oh my gosh, you're right. As he was doing something uh, with, I want to say, I don't want to say, because I don't want to speak something I don't know, but I was like, that was how it came. So it comes very, very differently, right? And the the more I go into this, the sometimes the less I experience, and I think I'm being called back to, like, okay, what if I'm not like feeling something when I'm doing, what was I thinking? Because it might have come in that way. Or I really love automatic writing, and I will keep a little book and pen next to me whenever I do any kind of work, because especially with, I don't know, actually, I mean, you've done the PGM, so you're probably familiar with the serpent faced god.
Oh,
Do you remember
yes.
that
Yes, I
one?
do.
I love, love, love this rite. It is so wonderful. You're you're calling in the serpent faced god, and supposedly, like, you're supposed to use it in like a case of emergency to get like an answer, right? But I use it in completely non-emergency situations. Maybe I'm calling wolf, I don't know, but I take my chances. But I call them in, and I always have a notebook and pen, and I start to write. And it's been really cool, because one of the first, maybe it was no, it's probably like the second time I did it, I felt myself getting very like swaying almost drunkenly. And then as I was saying the words, I started to like slur them almost, and like it felt very snake-like, very slithery, like. And then my head like started to kind of move like a snake, and I had put a little veil over my head, so I had my vision obscured, much like I would think like the scales of the snake. And I was all of a sudden noticing, my eyes were checking out the offerings I had put on my altar. And it was moving almost like, and it was me, but it was like the serpent faced guy was very, do what? It wasn't just me. And I let that kind of take its course. It was a couple of, well, maybe a minute, maybe not even that long. It was a couple of long seconds. And then I had my pen in my hand. And then as I kind of felt myself stable, I started to write. And it the things that I wrote didn't make sense. And so I typically will take and use the phonetics of what I wrote and put them in a translator. And what came out was friend of God. And then the other time it was friend or God. So I've been working with the serpent face God ever since then. I was like, okay, I don't know who or what you are, and I don't care. I just think it's a really incredible feeling, and I get some fun messages as well. That's something else that I really recommend is automatic writing and keeping like a book or notebook and pen around anytime you're doing any sort of like ritual or like spiritual work, because you never know what's going to come up, right? And when you just let yourself kind of fall into the I guess it's kind of like hypnotic, right? When you fall into that state, the first couple of things you write might be like goofy. But I always like to think of it as like the spirit kind of calibrating. Like the whole thing is like calibrating itself. And so it's like, okay, I eat ice cream. Yes, I do. Okay, whatever. And but what down in a bit, you'll get like a really interesting message, and it might be one word, it might be a sentence, it might be two words, who knows? But they come, and uh, not always, but they do come, and more often than not. So that might be something that you can incorporate if you haven't already, Octavian.
Well, it's actually really interesting that you would bring this up because along with Hecate, I also have a devotional practice to Selene. And they're really, when you look at Selene as far as contemporary work, there's not much. There are a couple invocations to her in the PGM, and then you have the Orphic hymns. But there's not really much structure for someone who wants to kind of have a whole practice devoted just to her. And so what I was doing was, talking to her in a very nonchalant way, just about my, just really getting to know her. And then I would read her Orphic hymn 3 times. Also, I really like your recitation of it the other night for the full moon.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I was doing that, and I've been doing that for a couple months. And I won't say that I was getting bored, but I was feeling like talking to a wall. And I was getting the feeling that just saying this one thing over and over and over again, it wasn't quite connecting. And I tried the hymn to Selene from the PGM. And if anyone has done that, you'll know trying to say that entire thing with the barbarous words once is a pain. Trying to do it 3 times every night, it's impossible. You will lose your mind. And so one of the ideas that I had been playing with was doing automatic writing in order to create very, very specific personal hymns to her from me, and hoping that she would direct me using that method of automatic writing to create new invocations that would allow me to connect with her on a much deeper level.
I love that. You know that, and you said it was kind of like speaking to a blank wall. I wonder, if sometimes, because I find that with certain deity, if I'm doing a practice, I'm like, why am I getting nothing? Like I was working with Helios all winter long, and it was all summer long. Excuse me, what am I saying? Just coming out of winter, all summer long, and for the longest time, and I remember thinking, I just want him to turn his head a little bit, and like I was doing the the solar father initiation, and I was completely unclothed in the middle of the day, like with the windows wide open, the shades open, hot blaring sun, because we don't have air conditioner, like hot blaring sun. And I'm going through this thing, and like you're saying with those barbarous names, it's like any sort of like when you get to magical voices, it becomes like you have to like really study what you're like staring at, right? Your eyes start
Yes,
to
you
cross,
do.
and you're like, like I'm just trying to get through this. And I was doing mine 7 times, and I would feel like I had just walked through the desert and I was so hot and like not getting anything. And I remember thinking, I've done this for months, every Sunday for months and months and months. And I don't even think he's turned his head once. And then I realized I had such bad insomnia that entire summer. I was feeding myself like caffeine all day, every day. And then couldn't, I was like, I guess that was his little way. But I wonder if sometimes, like, when we're interacting with these deities and it feels like we're talking to a wall, I wonder if maybe they feel like maybe we sound monotonous to them. And so, to your point of like rewriting like a hymn to her that she hasn't heard before, that would like perk up their ears, right? They're those metaphorical ears, and kind of turn and look our way a bit more. I love that you're writing the hymns. I write hymns to deity as well, and it feels cathartic, right? I feel like I'm doing something special for my deity, or for the spirit that I'm wanting to work with at that moment. It it's such an intricate thing, or excuse me, it's such an intimate thing to have that relationship with the spirit. And your relationship with Celine is not like any others, right? Like, if Ian were to have a relationship with Celine, and maybe you do, it is so different, right? And your relationship with Akate is so vastly different than maybe mine. We have these different ways to communicate with them, and it makes it really special and individualized. We have friends in our lives that are on this earthly realm, that when we're together with them, I'm like, man, you're the best. Like, and then you have someone else meet them, and they're like, I don't know what you see in that person, but okay, whatever. We're like, what? They're the bee's knees. I don't get it. Like, why do you not get along? But it's kind of the same like thing with the deity, right? Like, we may have this like really amazing relationship with one, or maybe it's more just like, hey, yeah, I know you, like we bumped into each other a couple times, cool, respect.
I definitely agree, and I think that's a really, really great perspective. We're coming down to the wire, but before we go, I wanted to ask and just have you elaborate on people who, have been doing this for a while and they aren't quite getting those visceral results or those feelings or those visions, or, don't feel like their psychic abilities are, awakening. What would you say to those people in order to really get them on the right path to developing their senses?
That's a great question. So I really, really believe that when we are able to trust ourselves, then we're able to be able to feel that connection even more. So if you think about it, we go through our day to day without trusting ourselves, and second guessing everything, right? Like, did I do that right? I don't know. Wait, should I have maybe, did I use THEIR or did I use THERE? Like we're second guessing everything throughout our life. And so I think starting to exercise with our gut, like our gut feeling, really getting to trust ourselves, then we're able to tap into that a little bit more clearly, because we start to second guess what it is that we're getting from spirit. So if someone wants to exercise that, it could be something so simple as like, what color do I want to wear today? And like, go with your first, like, we all have like, okay, I mean, my closet is mainly black, and I have
Same, I was going to say, that's a very easy one for me.
a couple of things. Maybe it's like underwear, then like, what color underwear do I wear today? But just going off that gut reaction of like, blue, no, and no, maybe it's purple, no, go with the blue, and start to act on what that first thing is, even if you like you second guess yourself. Or if it's like with like food, you're reaching into the pantry, you're like, what do I feel like dinner tonight? And the first thing you think about is like, I'm gonna make a soup, and then you see something, nope, I'm gonna make this. No, go with this, like, go with that gut feeling and start to exercise that, because then you will stop second guessing when those messages come from spirit, right? Something else that we can do is I have a little black cauldron, and this is how I've always scryed. I've never used a mirror. I fill it up with water and I just add a couple of drops of like oil, of olive oil or something. And I'll ask myself, like, I'll get myself in like a nice calm state, have my candles lit, dimly lit room too, because you want that flicker of the candle in that to be the accoutrement to the movement of the oils, right? And I'll ask a question, and I'll look into the cauldron and I'll let it start to take shape. Now, there's only so much that can happen with balls of oil in water, but you start to let yourself really, really get imaginative in this process. And let's say, like, you've got like 2 or 3 balls of oil in this water, and the light is flickering. What are you seeing? Like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? If it's a wheel, because it's round, go with it. I see a wheel. That means movement. Am I moving towards something? Is it move? And then when you ask, am I moving towards something? Like, let it do its course. Like, is it moving forward? Is it moving backward? Is it moving up? Is it moving down? And use that as like, oh, I am moving towards something, or oh, I'm moving back from something or away from something. Should I be moving away from something, or should I be moving toward something? What is this thing that I should be moving toward? And start asking it questions, and just as a little exercise, just throw in like what you think, right? Like that gut reaction. I should be moving toward maybe getting 8 hours of sleep or something like that. And have it be kind of fun like that too. Ask it something that isn't necessarily so intense, right? Starting off with like, should I have ice cream tonight? Or am I moving away from my fitness goals? I don't know. Start with something fun and then like let it progress into, the more like esoteric. But that way you start to really trust yourself, and you start to calibrate your own vision, your own like vision with the scrying, or your own vision with your intuitive call. Does that make sense? Or did I just ramble for 5 minutes on nothing?
No, no, no. That was really beautiful. And it's very, really, really resonating with me because this is something, and like Ian said, I'm very by the book. And so I like things very traditional. And that means I like to get an idea of doing something. But because it's not in the right day, hour, and time of season, I just don't do it. And that's my Achilles heel. And I think Ian has the one last question for tonight, and we'll wrap up.
Yeah.
Maybe a question. I just really, I was vibing with everything you said so hard because, like, I do give, I'll teach and I have my own ways of doing things. And the last few subjects you talked about, just the first impulse is so absolutely important that I could not have given
Yeah.
or heard better advice on developing any kind of psychic or spiritual communication and internal, like just getting yourself on that current and frequency. The way you described it, perfect. El dente, chef's kiss. Like, I'm sitting here like, I think we had a talk and it was like a very similar advice, but you put it eloquently, and just that, let your mind relax for a moment and just go on the first impulse you have, especially when you're not actively thinking. Like, advice I give too, and I do in my personal, is I go for a walk in the woods and I get the urge to step left or step right, and I just go in the first one mindfully. Or like say hi to a tree, or like sometimes you do work with spirits, so you get it. It sounds weird to everybody else, but like I'll go on walks and I'll just get the urge to greet the river, and I'll say something nice. I'm like, hello, Sister River. Like, you look very beautiful today. Like, I like how the sun hits you. And after a while, you realize that you're getting feelings back. And just kind of that moving through, and that trust, it's so important. I just wanted to give you that. We could have questions for days. So I guess I could give you one more. And I know you're a devotee of Hecate. And I have a relationship with her too, though I wouldn't consider myself a devotee. But you began doing tarot before you connected with Hecate. Am I correct?
Correct.
Doing tarot your whole life, after you became really dedicated yourself to the goddess and communication with her. How could you explain your how is your tarot affected? Not like the accuracy, but the communication. How did that feel? Did that evolve at all in any kind of
Oh,
connection with your work with her?
that is a great question. I would say it has evolved immensely when, especially when it comes to, well, a couple of things. Like I said, I use it as a a means of connecting sometimes with spirits when I'm doing my mediumship, which she is overseeing. So she is feeding me a lot of the information through those cards. But then when I'm doing like a traditional tarot reading, I think I think that I've worked with, I'm how do I answer this? I feel like I've worked with enough currents now of her that if I'm reading for someone, I that can be translated in the deck, right? And so I'll get those those very subtle currents pop through that I can perhaps talk about if the client is comfortable with that sort of with that sort of work. But I think it has probably enhanced maybe my ability to read, to scry to anything. Because going back to that initial, what we were just talking about, that gut reaction, she's really responsible for a lot of my confidence when it comes to that. Uh, yeah,
No, that's fair.
I guess
Thank you
that's
for sharing. You know, I could, no, no, that was fine. And like, I guess Hecate is a goddess of many, many paths, but call it psychic ability or divination or scrying or just communicating between liminal spaces. Some of her chief, she's magic. She's the mistress of magic, the matrix, so to speak,
oh
of
yeah.
that. And I can talk all day about all of these things, but I just wanted to say thank you. I know I got to listening to you was an absolute pleasure and was very informative. So I think we're
Me
running
too.
out of.
God.
It's our pleasure,
It made me
believe me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to communicate again sometime, but the nerd stuff of the work. But yeah,
oh
thank you for coming on.
But before we let you go, can you let everyone know where they can find you and your, all of your services and things like that?
Absolutely. Thank you for giving that some love. I appreciate it. I'm easy to find online. If you are in any socials, it's just at Wilde Medium. Wilde Medium is WILDE Medium. And my website is wildemedium.com, WILDE medium.com. I offer a few different services. I've got mediumship life path readings where we can connect with your spirit guides, ancestors, past loved ones, or any other prominent energies. I work really closely with the divine feminine, if you didn't gather from this. I have a divine feminine consultation and ritual that I offer, which is really great. I get to connect with a client and talk about any sort of deific work they're doing and how maybe they can build on that, or if they aren't, we can pick up on those currents like we talked about earlier on in the podcast, and we build ritual around that. And we do a little petition at the end, and I send you off with that for yourself. And of course, astrology, because who doesn't like to know their their astrology, right? And then if I may plug a live event that I have coming
Absolutely.
on May. Yay! It's a Kate related too. It's on May 11th. If you are in or around or will be in or around LA on May 11th, I'm doing a workshop called Akate Unveiled. It's going to be a feminist exploration and empowerment workshop at Open Eye Crystals here in Los Angeles. And it's an hour and a half, and we're just going to dive into the realms of Akate and look at it through a feminist lens and the ancient wisdom and workings, and on how we can use that for our own growth and empowerment. So yeah,
Well, that is
thank
really
you.
exciting. We are in rural Pennsylvania, so we won't be able to join the live event. But I think it would be really cool if, one of us could get a reading from you on the show at some point. I think that'd be a really
Yes,
fun experiment. So I will put
let's
all of
do
the
it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will put all of your links in the show notes below, and I highly encourage all of our listeners to go and get a reading from Mandy. She is amazing. So thank you so much for coming on, and we cannot wait to have you on again.
Thank you both. Have a great weekend. Happy Friday.
You as
You
well.
too.
Happy Friday.
That was our interview with Wilde Medium, and we really enjoyed having her on the show. We loved talking to her, and we very much look forward to getting a reading from her on the show, as well as many other things. As always, I'm Octavian Graves, and this is Strange Dominions. Have a good night.